Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. We are going to talk about probably one of my truly favorite topics, and that is all about spring cleaning. Now, I am obsessed with spring cleaning in my personal life, like almost embarrassed to say I have a little vacuum cleaner at my desk. I just took literally 10 bags of stuff to Goodwill. But the feeling you get when you do spring cleaning and you get that clutter and that chaos out of the way and just refocus and reset is such an incredible feeling. So today we are with our very own Nick from Merkle Cardinal Path to really talk about what this means in the digital world, right? For your digital properties, for your website, what that spring cleaning looks like. So Nick, I'd love to get a quick intro from you.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Iyengar. I'm based in Ann Arbor, and I manage the Google Analytics business for Merkle in North America.
I love it. Well, welcome, welcome. We are happy to have you. Any spring cleaning tips at home or anything you've done recently to kind of get the zen back a little bit?
I'm glad I'm not doing this in my basement because I wouldn't want anyone to see the state of our basement right now. And also the desk vacuum. Michelle, I need you to send me the Amazon link for that later. I didn't know that was a thing, but now that I do, I definitely need it.
I'm embarrassed to say I now can't live without it, but here we are. I will definitely send that over. So as you can tell, and welcome to my basement as well, right? Things can get cluttered, whether we recognize it or not. The chaos can just kind of creep in. And over time, if you don't do that spring cleaning, it just gets messier. And while sometimes you think you can put off that spring cleaning, as soon as you do it and you get that out of the way, you feel so much better. So just like your closet, in my case, this is not totally off from what it looked like prior, but just like your closet, your website also very much becomes cluttered over time with third-party tags. And the more tech that you bring into your ecosystem, the more tags come with that. I know, Nick, you've been very much involved in this conversation with a lot of your clients over at Merkle Cardinal Path. So I'd love to learn what you're hearing from them.
Yeah, so when I heard about the kind of spring cleaning webinar, I wanted in because it's such a broadly relevant topic, and it's something that me and my team are navigating with almost every single client that we work with. So we did a random sample of a bunch of different clients that we work with, and we found, just as an example, just over 98 tags running on a client's site on average. And there's a pretty wide spread there. Some clients with like several hundred. And I think the reason behind it is this, exactly like you said, Michelle, this kind of slow but steady build up over time, right? We don't wake up on a Monday morning and publish 200 new tags to our site, right? But if we haven't done some spring cleaning, if we haven't gone through and like pruned our tag management system and that kind of stuff in a year or 2 years or 5 years, you know who you are. You do wake up one morning and all of a sudden you have hundreds of tags, and that data is being streamed to like dozens of different destinations downstream. So a lot of this has to do with just the ever increasing proliferation of MarTech and ad tech systems that are out there. As organizations buy more MarTech and buy more ad tech and buy more analytics systems, you see this on the right hand side, right? Just as that increases over time, individual organizations feel the impact of that themselves. And I I think a lot of people know that tag bloat, as we call it, has some of these negative consequences, things like site latency, load times, and all that has kind of downstream impact as well. And that's not even to mention some of the more serious stuff, frankly, like the kind of compliance risks that come from like live streaming data to third parties and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the good thing about all this is that there's a lot of kind of quick and easy fixes that we can make, hence the kind of spring cleaning message here. And one of the reasons why I think a lot of clients maybe don't appreciate this at first is a lot of the tags that contribute to this buildup, right, and that cause your basement to get cluttered, so to speak, and that kind of stuff. A lot of these tags are actually super redundant, Michelle. Like we see a lot of this across our clients. So common examples would be, we have a lot of clients that use Google Analytics, for example, for like site and app analytics, but they're also using other platforms for similar things. Like maybe they're pushing data into Adobe as well, or Amplitude, or whatever it is. And a lot of times there's a ton of overlap, right, in what data they want to send into which platform. Another really common example would be things like conversion tracking for various social media networks or ad buying platforms or whatever. So if you're sending conversion data to Google and Meta and TikTok and Pinterest and Snapchat and LinkedIn and the Trade Desk and Bing and Baidu, like all these places, if you think about that, like you're actually sending 99% of their data to all those places. But most organizations have like one tag per vendor, even though the data being transmitted is basically the same. And so, yeah, this graph that you see on the right, it happens for a bunch of reasons. But the good news is there's a lot of opportunity to clean this up without actually losing a lot of functionality or losing a lot of data. So on the next slide, we have a really good example. I mentioned, we encounter this in the wild regularly, like day in and day out, working with our clients. And this client here, I kind of cherry picked, admittedly, but the reason why is that it summarizes a lot of these issues in one view. So what you can see here is, this is an organization that has a lot of tags, and that's not inherently bad or wrong, right? A lot of times we have these tags for a reason, but there are a lot of tags, and that's a kind of clue that we should, at a minimum, be taking a look and asking, like, do we still need all these? Are any of these redundant? Could they be consolidated, right? And importantly, you can see that these tags are sending data to a lot of different vendors or a lot of different destinations downstream. Again, that's a clue. Like, where's all this data going? Who's receiving this data? Do they really need it? Is there a business requirement behind it? And because there are a lot of tags and a lot of vendors in the mix here, what you can see is that there are some knock-on effects, right? The load time for this site is a full 17 seconds. That's a lot. That's kind of extreme. And not surprisingly, the Lighthouse score, which is a measure of just kind of overall site performance, is really low, right? So 25 out of 100. A couple of other things that often go under the radar are worth calling out here, which is that you might think, well, yeah, I have a lot of tags, but we have a tag management system. We have a TMS, like a Google Tag Manager or a Telium or an Adobe Launch or whatever it is. And that's a system that helps us manage all that, right? So it might look like we have a lot of tags, but in reality, there's some logic in place to manage all of it. But what you see here is, again, something that's very common. Yes, there's a TMS in place, but if you look carefully, you notice there's a heavy kind of weight or presence of tags outside GTM in this example. So you've got things like the Snapchat conversion pixel and the Criteo tag that are actually like hard coded into the site. And then last thing I call out here is the concept of piggybacking. And this is kind of like the monster under the bed. This is the sort of thing that we sort of hope we just close our eyes and we won't see it, or it'll just go away. And I'm not picking on anyone here, but this is just one real world example where the Criteo tag is by itself instantiating a bunch of other tags that, do you know if that's happening, right? Do you know all the different other vendors that are being piggybacked off of some tag that's happening on your site? So lots of tags, not all of them are even being managed by the TMS, and some of them are even like piggybacking large volumes of other tags onto your site. And that's what drives the load time and the latency and all that kind of stuff, not to mention the kind of compliance risks and all that. So just one kind of anecdote, but a good example because it sort of represents a lot of the different issues that we can address if we just roll up our sleeves and take those 10 bags out to Goodwill, so to speak. So yeah, a kind of good synopsis of this problem in a nutshell.
And I like what you mentioned here too. I feel like sometimes when it comes to tag management, we kind of know some of the impact, right? Like page load speed, lighthouse score, that kind of thing. I think sometimes the lesser known impact of like the tag chaos like this, the tag bloat, or I don't know, tag hoarding, if we're talking about the sense of spring cleaning, right? Is things like, do you know, even if you know what tags are on your site, what tags do those tags have? And what data are they sending? What are they collecting? Like tags on tags, that chain reaction that can also put you in a bad situation. So when you declutter these tags and you really take back control of the data with a single tag, that's what we're talking about. And the best way to do this is by going server side. So Nick, I'd love to hear your thoughts on server side versus client side.
Yeah, so I think, the tag management system that a lot of organizations run, which at this point is kind of a legacy system that going back, a decade or more. Once upon a time, it was a good thing, right? Like it enabled organizations to be more nimble and to like add new technology to the site as needed, and that was a good thing because in the kind of bad old days, it was actually really hard to make even like minor updates to the site, right? Like adding a conversion pixel or these kind of things. But like a lot of things, there's just too much of a good thing, right? And so we don't need better tag management. We actually now need to move the opposite direction and move towards tag removal. But tag removal doesn't necessarily mean that you like lose that data or you lose that functionality, because again, going back to the key point here, there's a huge opportunity to just consolidate tags. And so moving to a server-side model, that might sound like kind of a technical term, but it's very simple. And this graphic kind of illustrates it, is basically all about this. We want to move from a dynamic on kind of the top half of this graphic where every vendor, every system you're using has its own dedicated tag running in the browser or running in the client, hence the name client-side tagging. And what we want to do instead is say, okay, if I want to send, for example, conversion data back to these 10 platforms, I know that data is basically all going to be the same or virtually the same. So why don't I consolidate that down to one kind of master overarching tag? It's exactly what MetaRouter can do. Consolidate that down to one tag running on the site. And then later, using a system and an architecture that like we own and that we control, then we can fan that data out or syndicate that data out to wherever it needs to go. And by the way, because we have a lot more control over the system and third parties aren't just like putting a straw in our milkshake and sucking up all this data, we can actually control what they receive, right? So we can redact things that might be sensitive, like PII, like email addresses or IP addresses, or just anything that's outside the scope of like what that vendor actually needs. So again, not picking on anyone, but if you want to send conversion data to Meta, you've got some idea of like what is the sort of minimum data that Meta needs to fulfill that purpose. And you don't need to be sending them anything beyond that, right? But guess what? Like if you put the Meta conversion pixel on your site and let them directly kind of harvest that data, they're going to get a lot more than just the bare minimum that's required, right? And so this distinction between client-side tagging, where every partner you're working with has their own dedicated tag directly embedded in your site, versus a server-side model, right, where you have this kind of master overarching tag, and then you fan that data out later in a controlled manner that puts you in a good spot in terms of compliance and governance and all that, is how you remove tags from your site. Right? So we're not saying remove tags and like stop doing analytics, remove tags and stop sending conversion data back to your advertising partners. We're saying remove tags by consolidating tags, right? And accomplish the same end goal by moving to this server-side model. So you can see some of the benefits here on the right-hand side. We've touched on them already. But basically the idea here is that if you go through this exercise, you can drastically reduce. Now, maybe not go down to only one tag, right? But drastically reduce the amount of tags that are running on the site. You're going to get a lot of benefits from that, right? Load time, user experience, all that good stuff, SEO rankings. You're going to significantly improve your control over who's getting data from your site and your app and what data they receive. That's going to make your compliance and privacy and legal teams really happy. And kind of an aspect of this that goes under the radar is that you're also going to significantly improve your data capture. And the reason why is when you're sending data to a first-party server that you own, instead of live streaming data to third parties that you don't control, things like ad blockers and tracking blockers are going to view that a lot more favorably, right? Like sending data to a first-party endpoint that you control that's on the same domain, right? It's a lot less risky. It's a lot less invasive. And as a result, data that you would otherwise lose to an ad blocker or a tracking blocker, you actually won't lose. Now, I want to be careful and make sure that people don't hear this as like, oh, this is a kind of sneaky way to work around privacy regulations. Like, please, please, please don't hear what I just said through that lens. But it's quite the opposite. It's because you're now collecting data in a much less invasive way, in a more privacy respectful way, you'll have better throughput on your data, right? So think about the benefits in terms of reach and addressability for the cookieless future that's coming up and all that. At Cardinal Path, we see somewhere between like a 10 and 30% improvement in data capture or data throughput when we make this move from client side to server side. So your mileage may vary, but the direction is pretty obvious, right? You're going to see better throughput. So a lot of benefits here. And again, it all comes down to this idea of consolidating tags that are running in the client by moving to this server side model.
What I really love about what you're saying here is kind of like what we were saying before, right? There's this maybe misconception of what spring cleaning actually does, right? Like you said, it's not taking away things, you're consolidating, you're organizing, you're giving control back to the people that are collecting the data for their specific use cases in a way that maintains parity, maintains efficacy, maintains accuracy, it actually improves compliance and data collection. And I think both of those things combined, like making your day-to-day better while also seeing things like more data and better data governance is really a key point that we're trying to push home here. So I think that's really important to remember. So for all those reasons, why do we love this idea of spring cleaning, right? I mean, this was probably me last weekend when I put together 10 bags for Goodwill. Like, I love spring cleaning because it makes me more productive and efficient. I feel like I'm really getting stuff done. I can streamline my closet to find what kind of clothes I want, what outfits I want, depending on my use case, right? The occasion for wearing them. It's easier for me to know what I want to wear for that occasion or what data I want to use for certain use cases when you know what exists and what you need to use it for, right? Same with your tracking tags. And with that comes clarity and focus. So you can actually concentrate on your priorities and the problems you need to overcome and what you need to do to get that done, right? Without worrying about all of these different third-party tags and what data they're collecting and where are they routing to. And heaven forbid one of those tags goes down and you have no control over fixing that and getting your site up. I mean, we've just heard this with big brands like McDonald's, for example. I think that happened last week or maybe the week prior. I mean, it happens quite often. So we want to give you the clarity, the focus, the peace of mind that comes with decluttering your website and really spring cleaning to, of course, let's reduce your stress. Right? Let's let you sleep better at night. With that control, with a single tag, you get that one lever to make the changes that you need to make all of this stuff possible. So while I love spring cleaning in my personal life, it also very much transfers into our professional lives when we think about spring cleaning these digital properties. Nick, I don't know if you have any thoughts on why you love digital spring cleaning here.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add, like, when I first heard the sort of spring cleaning theme, I was like, okay, it's April, we'll talk about spring cleaning, that's great. But I started realizing, like, there's actually so many parallels between, spring cleaning in your personal life and kind of applying this to your site or your mobile app or whatever it is. I think a couple of things. One is it's easy to put this off, right? Like, it's easy to say, oh, hey, we'll be less busy next weekend. Like, let's do it next weekend. And all of a sudden, next weekend becomes next year, or more realistically, it kind of becomes never, right? So it's very easy to procrastinate. But on the other hand, if you actually just roll your sleeves up and get this done, what we find is the sort of universal reaction of clients that actually go through this work is, gosh, we should have done this so much sooner, right? The benefits are pretty obvious. Like, everyone's a winner here, whether you're marketing, IT, compliance, agency partners, right? And yeah, the almost universal reaction is, we just wish we would have done this sooner. So very similar to when you're cleaning out your basement or your closet or whatever. You rarely get done and then think, gosh, I miss having all those boxes stacked up in my closet, right? So yeah, I miss having those 100 tags that were duplicative and we didn't need anymore. So we don't get that kind of feedback typically. So yeah, lots of parallels here, whether it's in your personal life or with your site or your app.
I love it. So let's get into it. Sometimes we don't know where to start when it comes to we're so overwhelmed with all the stuff, all the tags. It sometimes can be hard to get started, right? So we want to jump through today 4 steps to getting started with your digital spring cleaning, specifically around decluttering your website. So we'll start by talking about what a tag audit looks like and understanding what those tags are doing and the impact those tags are having, how to remove the unnecessary tags, and then finally, of course, what we're all really focused on are what are those KPIs, track and monitor what the results of removing those tags are and consolidating everything into a single tag so that you are seeing those benefits that Nick talked about earlier. So we'll go back to what this audit looks like. So Nick, I don't know if you want to walk through how you guys do this at Merkle.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what I would say is like there are a lot of tools that can help you do these kinds of audits that work just kind of off the shelf. We have some of our own kind of like proprietary methods that we use. You can also just do this manually. Like in all honesty, like this is not that difficult or that big of a lift. But yeah, we do a lot of this work, and the reason why doing an audit is the first step is that we find just knowing which tags are actually running on your site and where they're implemented and what they're doing, like that's not a given. It sounds really basic, and you might think, oh yeah, like we totally know. But what we find is that the results of these audits are almost always illuminating in the sense that you maybe learn something new that probably like shouldn't be learning something new. Like we sort of should know what tags are on the site and that kind of stuff, but because of the nature of tag management and like democratizing tagging and like, hey, anyone can go in there and add a tag when they need. Well, guess what? Now you don't always know what's on your site, right? So an audit, rarely do we do an audit and not learn something new and not gain a kind of fuller picture of what's going on. So that's the first step. I mean, you just want to know what's actually live and running on the site. But the reason you're doing that, just to kind of follow through on this one, is you then want to do some categorization, right? Like, do we actually need this tag at all, right? What purpose is it serving? What kind of business requirement is this addressing? And then what would be the impact of maybe removing this tag, right? Like, if we don't need it, can we get away with removing it, or can we get away with maybe like consolidating it and using another tag instead? So it opens the door to asking a lot of the sort of next step type questions that we want to get to help us identify, where are the opportunities to remove or consolidate and get all those benefits that we've been talking about.
I love that. I think sometimes that categorized piece is a little understated because I think it is easier to like identify what tags are, on the site doing what. In some cases, I mean, kind of like you're saying, you just don't know what you don't know sometimes. Like you're going through clothes, you're going through those, bags and stuff. You don't always know what's underneath those boxes or piles of clothes, right? Sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. But I think that is really step one, but categorizing into what are they doing, like really what's their purpose is sometimes a piece that gets overlooked. So just calling that out because I think it's really, really important. And then this is taking it a step further, right? So you're understanding the impact, what it's doing, but also the value, the function, the performance. What are you really trying to get from that tag? And as Nick mentioned earlier, is that redundant? Is it critical? Does it need to be moved server side? How is it impacting your site, right? I mean, what was it, 17-second load time? Like, how is it really impacting? Do you even know? And then I think a really, really key point here that we're hearing a lot more at MetaRouter is that privacy piece, right? So where is that data going from that third-party tag and who additionally has access to it, right? And I think a key part of this is with a proper tag management system, when you're actually removing the tags, you get more control over things like your user's privacy and enforcing the consent that you're collecting and managing, right? So these key privacy components that go into the data you're collecting, doing that up front and enforcing consent, doing data governance, that cleanup up front as data is being collected, make everywhere that that data is being routed even better, right? It's safer, it's more secure, it's more compliant because you're doing all of that process up front. And I think sometimes that's another kind of overlooked piece of this decluttering and tag removal process, is that you can also make it more secure from the start. Nick, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this piece specifically.
I just think it's important to work through this kind of workflow. I mean, I talked to a Fortune 50 company that has hundreds and probably even thousands of kind of outdated legacy conversion pixels all over their site. And most likely they're harmless, like they're for trusted vendors and all that kind of stuff. But you start going through that rubric of like, does this tag still serve a function, right? Does it have a performance impact? Does it create a privacy risk? Does it like add any value, right? Any unique value? And as you go through that rubric, you start to realize pretty quickly, like a lot of these legacy tags score very sort of poorly on this rubric, and therefore are really good candidates to remove. And like I said, just it's routine for me to talk to clients that have, again, like hundreds of tags that fall pretty quickly into that either like remove bucket or at least like consolidate bucket. So
Yeah.
if anyone is looking at this thinking, oh well, like this can't happen to me, I encourage you to consider the possibilities.
Yep. That's a good point too. I think historically, and like you said, we kind of, this is one of those things that you can put off, you can put off, you can put off. Sometimes we don't hear about it until something kind of catastrophic happens, right? Like you have a data breach, your site goes down, people can't check out. I mean, it's oftentimes a reactive solution when
Yeah.
it really needs to be proactive for all the reasons we're talking about. So I think that is really, really key to the conversation here. Um, and as we talked about, prior, right? Like that third step is removing those unnecessary tags and consolidating while maintaining parity and not really skipping a beat with what you're doing within marketing. It's just a better, smarter way to take back control. I mean, this is one of the things that we see with other tag managers, is that their ecosystem, similar to what Nick was showing with the diagram, it's like chaos. I mean, as a marketer myself, I've been in the situation where I'm like, oh yeah, we can just add this tag, not thinking about the impact or, the implications on our IT team, or even necessarily what risks that opens up our consumers to, which I think many marketers today are really having to pay more attention to, given um, the state of the world and how privacy regulations are changing, and consumers really care about what happens with their data. So that piece that we talked about earlier between server side and client side, the benefits of moving server side are important, but also having a solution that can consolidate everything into a single tag to get rid of that unnecessary clutter is really critical here.
Yeah, just maybe one thing I'd add real quick on that, Michelle, is when we talk about removing tags, just as a reminder for everyone, I think there's sort of two ways that can happen, right? One is you'll definitely find some tags that you just don't need anymore, period.
Yeah.
I'm very confident that you'll find some tags. And for those, I don't think there should be a question about like, well, should we move it server side or sort of keep it client side? No, just remove it entirely. Just delete it entirely. And you will find tags like that just simply do not serve a purpose anymore. And then there are tags where like they may serve a purpose, but it's kind of a shared purpose, right? Or a redundant purpose. Again, these examples of like sending conversion data back to multiple systems, or like site analytics data back into different platforms. Those are examples where you can remove, not just by removing like outright, but it's removing by consolidating, right? And so this isn't about like pushing all your tags server side for the sake of pushing server side. That's a means to an end, right? Like just get rid of the tags entirely if they don't serve any purpose at all.
100%. Well said. That is the goal of spring cleaning. Absolutely.
So you
Yeah,
get a lot of benefits from this, Michelle. And one of the things that we found interesting, like working with MetaRouter more and more, is from our point of view, we have a lot of good case studies, and we can show clients with like good, definitive, quantifiable evidence, right, that making investments in spring cleaning and going through these kinds of exercises pays off. And you see an example here where, as we work with the client to find more ways to pull the levers and turn the knobs, we get that load time down. And what do you know? Like the conversion rate on this particular e-commerce site actually went up. And I think that that's probably what you'd expect, right? But good to be able to sort of prove it out with data. But the other thing that you see here is that like it's a grind, it's a slog. And we're going through this week by week, looking for those milliseconds that we can shave off and hoping the conversion rate goes up by another 0.1%. But what you see when you make the more kind of dramatic shift, not just kind of like pruning excess tags, but actually removing these from the client entirely and going to this kind of server-side model that we talked about, you start to see a much more dramatic and much more accelerated benefit. So we have that here on the next build. But Michelle, can you kind of speak to some of your experiences with some of your clients here?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think what's really interesting to hear when we think about results of consolidating, moving server side, really that decluttering, is there's long-term benefits and then there's the short-term benefits, right? So we talked a little bit about long-term benefits and what you see over time, especially as that impacts conversions. But this is an example of a POC that we did. You can see a lot of these results actually happen even quicker. I mean, within weeks, right? We're talking about time to interactive and your speed index and total blocking time, right? All of these KPIs that you need to care about, especially we see this so often with especially e-com, retail, anyone that does a lot of conversions or orders online, right? These impacts, maybe while small at first, make such a difference over time, but you're not just in it for the long haul, right? You want to see those quick victories. You want to prove that something is working, that things are changing, that you've made the right strategic decision in doing this. And like Nick kind of mentioned earlier, like your teams will thank you. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the biggest things that we're seeing with all of this as well is this idea of privacy and compliance. Now, I touched on it earlier, but I want to bring it home for a second really quickly here, is that this is a really hot topic and not all tag managers can do this specifically, right? It's one of the additional benefits that comes with centralizing everything into a single tag, into a single control plane that you're actually routing all of your customer data through, right? So it's one thing to, ask your users what their consent preferences are and collect those preferences, but it's another thing to actually enforce that and then route that to all of your downstream vendors, right? Your CDPs, your analytics tools, whatever it might be. And so I call this out because it really is a key thing to remember as you're evaluating tag management systems. Nick, I'm not sure if this is something that's come up with some of your customers as well.
Yeah, I mean, we see this a lot, particularly in your industries that are a little bit more regulated, like a healthcare or a FinServ, for example. But the truth is, it's not the Wild West anymore. Like every industry is a lot more regulated when it comes to customer data and privacy than it used to be, right? Like I've been doing this kind of work for about 20 years, and there was no regulation, and there wasn't even like a vocabulary to talk about sort of handling data with privacy and that kind of stuff in the past. And so
Yeah.
what we're seeing from the Merkle point of view is that basically this kind of legacy tagging model where like every vendor gets a dedicated tag and it runs live on your site and just scoops up this data in real time. Like this is over. This is coming to a rapid conclusion.
Yeah.
And people are moving in this direction. And a lot of times the privacy and compliance sort of angle or momentum is what pushes organizations over the edge, right? Like, yes, we can improve our load time, we can reduce our bounce rate, we can improve our cart abandonment rates or whatever it is, and that's all great. And those are reasons enough in their own right to be thinking about this stuff. But you know how it is, right? Like all of a sudden there's like threats of lawsuits or fines, and all of a sudden organizations can move really quickly, right? So yeah, privacy and compliance is stuff that certainly affects some industries more than others, but importantly, affects every industry now in a way that it simply didn't used to in the past.
I would absolutely agree. We hear that more and more. And I think for that reason and so many others, right? And we keep talking about this, but it's really a decision and a activity that impacts the entire organization and really every team. And whoever, there's always conversations about who owns the tags, right? Who owns the actual implementation of this stuff, right? We see it as a couple different teams. So we like to bridge the gap across, especially marketing, IT, InfoSec, right? Because of the impact it has across all these teams. And for example, as a marketer, I now have to care more about data privacy than I ever had before. And so being able to use kind of this this tag situation, if you will, as a forcing function to bridge that gap with my IT teams, to understand, what needs to happen to make sure that all of this is secure, it's safe, it's compliant, it's high quality, so that you can use it for all those downstream use cases, right? You can use that for personalization. You can use that data for AI. So that data is actually clean and usable, right? So it all starts with tag management. It all starts with that tag. It starts with that decluttering of that tag ecosystem to have these kinds of impacts. And we see huge success with this. I know Nick was talking about this as well, but like the results really speak for themselves. So I had a colleague the other day talk about MetaRouter as your website cleaning service, which really is kind of true, right? So we will work with Merkle Cardinal Path and Nick and his team to help do the audit, to help understand what is going on, what is the impact, what are the categories of these tags, what do you actually need them for, what can you remove, what can you do server side, really a strategic plan for how to make that switch so that you're seeing results like this. And like we said, it's not just about your website performance, which of course is a big part of the story, but we want you to collect more of your data by strengthening resilience against ad blockers, etc., but also increasing your addressability. So within the CDP world, and my gosh, this could probably be a whole nother conversation with us, Nick, is how this impacts CDPs. But I know addressability is always part of the conversation. With more data that gets enriched, if you have a CDP that actually powers that even more strongly as well, we can share some information on that. But across the board, these are some key things to expect when you declutter your website through better tag management. And when we say tag management, we really mean tag removal, right? So not only does that make this management idea easier, it's like herding cats, right? You don't want to have to herd a whole bunch of tags. You don't know how many there are, or where they're running, or what they're doing. You want to actually remove them in a sense that you can focus on one specific cat or one specific tag so that you can do everything with more effectively, and you're not as stressed out trying to figure out, again, the craziness, the chaos that comes with herding cats specifically. And we want to give you back control. We want to make sure that you are confident in the data that you have, that it is your data. You deserve to have full control over that data without having to rely on third parties for this information. With that, you're improving accuracy. We hear this all the time with tracking situations. We don't want to have teams like having to talk about these inconsistencies, right? One team has metrics that is vastly different from another team and having to reconcile that. We don't want you wasting your time on that. We want to give you accurate information so that you can focus on better activation. And finally, don't get bogged down by JavaScript. With tags comes JavaScript. Many times what we hear is even with some of the other tag managers, they tend to break because of this reliance on JavaScript. They can't handle tons and tons of events, and it actually breaks the system when you grow your volume. So as you're growing, keep that in mind, because it is something we've seen quite consistently, especially lately. So something to keep in mind. Nick, I don't know if you have any other thoughts here. Maybe I'm missing something.
No, not missing anything. I would just kind of underscore, like, better tag management at this point is almost an oxymoron, right? Like, tag management, the way that we think of it in the industry today, is what got us all into this position now, where we're looking at our sites and we have some raised eyebrows when we actually do an audit and realize, like, wow, I didn't know I had that many tags sending data to that many downstream destinations and all that kind of stuff. So we don't need better tag management. We need to be removing tags. And I think the question people should be asking is, what's the best way for me to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, we've talked through this quite a bit, but I think just to really bring it all home, we want to give you the peace of mind of a decluttered environment. One tag to improve performance, to have better measurement, better accuracy between platforms, and of course, enhance security so that you are not on the hook for things that go wrong or having that reliance on third parties when a data breach happens, that you are trying to do your best to avoid those types of situations so that you are building trust within your organization. You are giving yourself credit for what is being done. And again, your teams will thank you. We hear this all of the time. And your consumers will thank you that you're protecting their data, and that you are ensuring that you have full control over what is being sent to where. And our good friend Marta over at Allegro hears this all the time. She is now a champion in her organization for bringing on MetaRouter because she really wanted to focus on that privacy-centric, performant, and secure data handling that MetaRouter can offer. So she actually is implementing us before their CDP so that we can help feed their CDP with better customer data. And that is really exciting to see. So this is a takeaway. I will make sure everyone gets sent this after this conversation. But I like to look this as a 10 item checklist for when you are looking for that tag replacement solution, right? Like, what do you need to think about to ensure that you're getting the right solution that can grow with you, that can have that additional layer of privacy and protection, but really give you the best results as well, right? Like, we want to make sure that you are in a good position to have this as a solution for the long term. So some things to consider. Again, I'll make sure everyone has this after the webinar as well. And shout out to our friends at Merkle Cardinal Pass. So Nick, thank you for this. So they are going to offer anyone that wants to have a free tag audit done, a free tag audit. And so you will get, a readout like we talked about earlier. What are those tags? What is the impact? How can we start talking about this spring cleaning process to make sure you're getting the results that you need? And again, like spring cleaning, we hear time and time again that we wish we hadn't put this off, right? We wish we had done this sooner. We are getting so many conversations set up now already, for example, to prepare for holiday, right? To make that whole timing even better because you want to do more personalization. You want to use more AI. You want to get deeper into what you're doing from a real-time perspective, right? And so don't wait. Your teams will thank you and you will thank yourself when you have one thing to focus on versus a million tags. So please use this code. Let us know. We're happy to do that for you. And with that, we will open the floor to any additional questions. Let's see. All right, we got one here. If we do spring clean on our site, why would we also need to move server side? Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, okay, so I mean, this is a good question. And let me just sort of start by saying, like, it's not necessarily the case that like every single organization must move server side as a kind of box checking exercise, like move server side so you can say that you did. And realistically, yeah, you can make a lot of progress simply by, for example, like decommissioning tags that you no longer need in your more kind of conventional client-side tag manager. So let me just sort of state that up front, right? Like you can still make incremental progress here without needing to go to server side. But what I would say is the kind of migration to a server-side pipeline or a server-side architecture or whatever you call it. I mean, my point of view, just personally, is like this is a matter of time. So you're going to do this sooner or later. I think there are a lot of good reasons to do it sooner, and we covered some of those today. But yeah, I think it's just a matter of when, right? Not really a matter of if. And so, given that that's kind of the premise that I start from, I'm pushing a lot of my clients to be thinking about that. Even though, like I said, you can make kind of incremental progress in the meantime without actually going server side. So it's not that you can't make any progress at all, right, without going server side. But I think that's the clear long-term solution, and it's very likely where you're going to end up at some point anyway.
Right. I think, for me, I hate to say this, but it depends, right? Like you said, sometimes there are situations where client side makes sense and server side makes sense. I think to your point, if you plan on the server side transition, since you'll end up there eventually, that's really the way to think about like what is the best path to success that ultimately is server side for all of the reasons that we mentioned. So I think keeping that in mind and working with experts like Merkle Cardinal Path to know like what those differences are and what situations require client side versus server side. I think that is a very great conversation to have now so that you can plan for that. So I appreciate that. Good question. I think, let's see. We've got one from one of our LinkedIn friends. Let's see. You mentioned an increase of addressability at the CDP layer with server-side tagging. Is that because of additional data from previously ad block traffic or something else? So yes, that is a big part of it. So with some of our CDP partners, we see that they have a hard time with anonymous addressability, right? Like actually being able to understand who that person is without logging in. So one of the things we do at MetaRouter, we just actually had a press release on this. We call it our sync injector, but it's a unique way that we get identifiers, like we negotiate for identifiers in a first party to understand who that person is at the anonymous level, that we can then feed into the CDP to give you a more like holistic and comprehensive view into who that person is, so that within your CDP you can then activate on it. So even if they're not logging in, you still know who they are because of the negotiated IDs. Like it's really not easy to do. It's actually one of the reasons I joined MetaRouter, because that's such a unique way to do identity resolution, right? And so with that, you're feeding that into the CDP. You have a bigger addressability bucket that you can then activate from, if that makes sense. Cool. From Thad Baker, how big of a lift is moving to server side? Nick, I don't know if you want to start, and I'm happy to jump in as well.
Yeah. First of all, hey Thad, good to hear from you. And yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, the answers to this question are probably as diverse as the people that are listening to this. So,
Yeah.
If you want to move one tag for one vendor from client side to server side, that's the kind of thing that you probably can do in an afternoon, right? If you know what you're doing, and maybe you have like a GCP environment already provisioned and that kind of stuff. But if you're starting from scratch and you have hundreds of tags that need to be migrated, and those tags belong to like dozens of vendors, right? I mean, that's not the kind of thing that you sort of knock out in a week and then move on with your life. So what I would say is like starting with that tag audit, not to beat a dead horse too much, but starting with a tag audit is going to help you understand like what is the lay of the land, right? What is the landscape? And also like of the tags that we're running and the platforms that we're using, which of them like even can be moved server side, right? Some need to stay client side for like core sort of functional reasons, right? Your session replay tools and stuff like that. So that it's a really good question, and it's one that's natural for any organization to ask. In terms of how big a lift it is, it's going to be a huge range. But one of the things I'd say is, I feel really strongly that the juice is worth the squeeze, right? Especially in the kind of large to enterprise environment, where I'd say there's a kind of greater urgency to make this shift. So start with an audit, get a sense of what you're looking at, and then you'll have a clearer picture of what's it going to take to actually move these things client side to server side.
Like how big is that mound of clothes? That's depends on the amount of time it's going to take to organize and get to Goodwill, right? Like that's really what we're thinking here. I guess one other thing to mention here is thinking about the benefits, right? So we talked about like the long-term and short-term benefits is this as well. So I would say the future really is server side, and we're hearing this time and time again. We're seeing the results even with a POC, right? That takes say 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how long we want to run it. We are still seeing results. So I say that because while for so many reasons we hear time and time again server side is the future, it's like, well, what are you looking to achieve? Again, I would agree that starts with an audit. Like, how big is that mound of clothes you're trying to organize, right? We'll tell you how much time it may take to make that adjustment, but there are short-term wins into long-term strategies that can weave into this. So I would say definitely come with that idea in mind, as well as like what you're looking to achieve, right? Like what is your end goal in using customer data, and then also working backwards, because that helps understand what the tags are doing and why, and again what's necessary and unnecessary. I think it's a key part of the conversation as well. So cool. I think that is all the questions we have, and I know we're at time. So with that, thank you all so much for joining today. Any other questions that you have, please go ahead, post them in the comments, reach out to us. We are happy to help. We really believe in what this is doing in the future of, decluttering your digital space and the impact it can have on organizations, both small and big. So please let us know any other questions you have. Feel free to reach out, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.